Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Gonzalez or Alejandro. I'm one of the two Adobe evangelists here at the University of Arizona. Brian Puente is here with us as well to support and maybe heckle a little bit too, which is always welcome. And what we're doing today is just introducing you all to Adobe Illustrator. Show of a thumbs up or in the chat, who here has used Illustrator before? Got one. Brian's used it marginally. And I was like that, and that's okay. The me not well speaks to probably a lot of us. And that's a lot of us maybe experienced it and got a little lost in it and want to find our way. So that's going to be the goal today. I'm going to start by just talking about what Illustrator is, checking out the workspace, and then we're going to just see some fundamentals. As we're talking today, please feel free to chime in with any questions, thoughts, clarifications. If the question isn't quite where I am at the moment, I'll just maybe ask you to table it, but we will absolutely address it. You made time in your day to be here with us, and we would like to make it worth your while. So don't be shy. And there is almost always time at the end if you need a little more one-on-one help, if you have additional questions. So they are welcomed. We get excited when we see questions. All right, so this is a very handsome tree frog, if you haven't seen it yet. This Spark page is a kind of asynchronous resource for you all. You'll see we listed out some of the common keyboard shortcuts we talk about, and there's a little agenda. So if you click on this, it shoots you down to there and you can go back up. So let's go ahead and talk about Adobe Illustrator. Yes, Adobe Illustrator is a vector imaging program. And yes, we are recording. Thanks for checking. And what that means is that you can draw and create designs that can be scaled bigger or smaller and keep the quality. A lot of what we see on our screens is what we call raster based, which means it's made out of pixels. And I think my favorite way to explore that is to just open a file. So let's open Illustrator up, and on my desktop. So earlier this morning on my desktop, I made a rounded square. It's almost a circle. And let's go ahead and, well, here I am in Illustrator. You'll get a splash screen in the beginning. So we'll talk about the benefit of one versus the other. That's a really great question. Sometimes you simply don't have a choice. Photographs are pixel-based, they're raster. But design in Illustrator is generally vector-based, which means that you can work in what we call a scalable way. You can make it huge and small. When you're typing, you're using vector-based fonts. That's why you can change your font size and keep smooth edges. So I just clicked Create New, and I'm gonna just choose any of these presets. And let's drop this rectangle, this rounded square in here. And what I want you to notice is that at its normal size, it already looks a little bit pixelated. But if I grab this and make it even bigger, you'll see the pixels start to show, because what I've taken is made something that has a fixed size and enlarged it. And if I use a rectangle tool and draw a rectangle and round it, we'll review how to do this. And let's make it red. This rectangle, this square really, can be resized as many times and in as many ways as I like while it is inside Illustrator as a vector file. So I could zoom out as much as I wanted and keep making it bigger. It doesn't matter how big it is, it keeps a nice curve because it's actually made up of a mathematical equation that lets you scale it bigger or smaller. That's a really quick and dirty idea of raster versus vector. Just know that one of the biggest advantages of Illustrator is that you're working with vector design. And often the final output that you create will be a raster image, but you'll get to choose the dimensions and the size of it. You can output in vector as well, but you'll have a larger file size, generally speaking. So that's just a big concept. Illustrator is vector. Photoshop, which we've probably heard of, is raster based. We're playing with pixels. So since I've got Illustrator open, let's check out our workspace. Your workspace is dynamic, which means that you can move panels around, add windows, and you can customize it to whatever works for you. Generally speaking, that's something that comes as you find yourself working in Illustrator more and more. But if you like to see different workspaces, we have a workspace selector here in the top right. It's a rectangle with a little menu on the left-hand side. It's also under Window and Workspace. I think by default, we are all in Essentials, which gives you kind of the cleanest layout and really just what you need to get started. I'm okay with working with Essentials. Essentials Classic will add our tool options bar at the top, but you'll notice a lot of redundancy within Illustrator. I can change my stroke here, here, or here within my workspace. So for now, we can play with Essentials. Okay, on the left-hand side, we have our toolbar, and we have some common tools here. The selection tool, for which the keyboard shortcut is V. We have the direct selection tool, which lets us take an object and manipulate its points. We can reshape them instead of just resize them. We have the pen tool, which is a lot of people's enemy, and rightfully so. It has a big learning curve. And then we have our rectangle tool. And what I want you to notice is there's a little arrow next to here, which means this is like a tool drawer. You can open it up and see similar tools, the ellipse, polygon, star, and line. So these all make a shape. We have our brush and type, and that's kind of the short of what we'll use today. And we'll also use this shape builder tool. Down here at the bottom, we have something called fill and stroke. So every shape you make can have a color fill it if it's a complete shape. And it can have an outline, which is what we call a stroke. And you can choose the color. It can be a solid color, a gradient, or nothing. And then if you want to switch to manipulating your stroke, you can click on that here. But you can change that other ways. So that's the toolbar. In the center, we have what we call our artboard. And one thing that is a big difference, I always like to talk about Photoshop versus Illustrator because usually people have used one or the other. With Illustrator, your artboard, this white shape, does not limit you to where you can put your designs. So if I make a circle and I grab my move tool, my selection tool, excuse me, I can move it off to the side and still see it. So a lot of people will, as they design, they will put things on the outside that maybe they have different versions of, and then put them on the artboard when they're ready to export them out or give them even their own artboards. So the artboard defines the space that will be saved, but you can design outside of it. Hopefully that's not too confusing. So I said the selection tool, the keyboard shortcut is V, and you might have already noticed me moving around my workspace by zooming in and out. So I'm going to throw another favorite keyboard shortcut of mine at you. It's Command or Control plus, Command or Control minus, and Command or Control 0. So Command or Control plus will zoom in on whatever you have selected. If you don't have anything selected, it centers on your artboard. Command minus will zoom out, and Command or Control 0 will fit to screen to your artboard. So that's a nice way to get in close and to get a kind of further away view of how your design is looking. And then another keyboard shortcut that I use is I hold spacebar and I get a hand tool that lets me grab my artboard and move it around. It's called the panning tool. So if I click and pan, I hold spacebar and that lets me move it around. So that's a nice way to zoom in and move around. There's not a lot to check out on this circle, but we can follow the edge and we can see here's an anchor point and here's an anchor point. So these are Mac and PC. So on PC, it's Control. On Mac, it's Command. But for example, Brian put the Move tool. If you just press V on the keyboard, it switches over. You don't hold more than one. So if I wanted to switch to the Ellipse tool, the keyboard shortcut is L. So if I'm on the Move tool and I press L, Selection tool, it's called the Move tool in Photoshop. Now I'm on my Ellipse tool. So it's a nice, I highly encourage that you start to use keyboard shortcuts because they help you work more intuitively and quickly, in my opinion. Okay, so that's the artboard. And then on the right-hand side, we will have our properties, which we're going to spend some time manipulating today for sure. You also have layers, like Photoshop. Illustrator has layers. They're not exactly the same, but as you work, each object or text or anything will be its own layer within this layer group, and you can add as many as you like. Okay, are there any questions about the workspace so far? We've just kind of checked out. We had a quick little tour. And as they come, that's great too. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about shapes in Illustrator. So we're gonna open up our first file together, and it's called 01 Getting Started Shapes. So to open a file in Illustrator, you can, if it ends in .ai, double clicking should open it in Illustrator. You can also right click, open with Adobe Illustrator, or you can go File, Open, and find what you would like to open. So I think it's in my downloads. Yep. And File 01. And what I'd like you to notice as well is you probably only have one file open. I have two, and multiple files are organized by tabs in Illustrator. So there's my blank artboard, and here's the Getting Started file. It's kind of off center. I'm just going to press Command or Control 0 and get it in there. So what we like to think about when we get people started with Illustrator. Good. Thank you, Brian, for sharing the keyboard shortcuts. We like you to think about how you can combine multiple shapes to make more complex shapes. Instead of trying to draw one complicated shape in one go. And then once you get more comfortable, then you might start just drawing however you like. So let's go ahead and start by selecting the rectangle tool, or you can press M on the keyboard. And let's draw a square. So to draw a square, you need to hold Shift. If you don't hold Shift, and I want you to notice these little purple guidelines that show up, or are they pink? If you don't hold Shift, you can draw a rectangle. So if I hold Shift, it constrains it to equal proportions on all four sides. Same thing for the ellipse tool. It will draw, for any of these shape tools. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw a rectangle, and I'm going to draw it a little bit small and not quite where I want it, so that we can see how we can manipulate a shape after we've drawn it. the first thing, if we're trying to match this rounded rectangle, you'll notice the one I drew has a black outline, a black stroke. So I'm actually going to go over here to the right and, well, I'll just put 0 for stroke. And this stroke, if you are planning on going into Catalyst Studios and doing some laser cutting, you'll definitely want to know how to choose your stroke size to define an etch versus a cut, but that's not quite today. So I turned the stroke off. I could choose a different fill color here if I wanted, but it is white, so we'll keep white. Now let's go ahead and zoom in. I'm pressing Command or Control plus. While I'm on the shape tool, I can resize and manipulate it, but I prefer to switch to my selection tool so that I don't accidentally draw another shape. With this, I can get rid of this second shape that I drew. I can press delete because I have it selected, or I can press possibly everybody's favorite keyboard shortcut, Command or Control Z. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the selection tool, which is V on the keyboard, just to be safe. That lets me grab this square and move it around. I can grab it and line it up here. And then this should be a familiar kind of bounding box for a lot of programs now, PowerPoint, Google Slides. Anytime you drop something in, it has this box with points that if you move your mouse to the outside, you can rotate the shape, which isn't what we're looking to do, so I'm going to undo. And then you can also resize and even reshape it. But again, I would like to keep the proportions, but make it bigger. So I'm going to hold Shift. And I'm going to make it the same size as this little outline. And now I've got them the same size generally, but I have one major difference. This one has had its corners rounded, and this one still has 90-degree corners. And Illustrator has these really nice widgets that let you quickly change the shape of a corner. And that's what these little targets, these little circles are. And if you grab, you'll see your mouse turn into an arrow with a curve underneath it. And that means you're about to change the shape of that corner. And by default, it will change all corners at the same time. I can turn it into a circle if I pull down all the way. So the way these work is you click and hold, and you drag down to round them. You drag up to sharpen them, I guess is the best word there. So I could drag down until I hit the kind of stencil shape there. You can individually round them with the direct selection tool. That's that white mouse, by clicking and doing that single point. So you do have that control. We'll revisit the direct selection tool more later. Was everybody able to make a rounded square like that? See some thumbs up. I got one. All right, we got some yeses. Let's make a triangle. And there's a few ways to make a polygon. Either way, we're going to use the polygon tool here. So you'll click on your rectangle and choose polygon tool. So if I wanted to, I could just click and drag, and you'll notice this tool, it's a little different from the rectangle. Your tool kind of comes out to the left and up instead of whatever direction you're dragging. And you can rotate it as you draw it. If you want it to be on a level plane, you can hold Shift and it will put it at 0 degrees and keep the proportions even, just like with our rectangle. But we're not controlling how many sides it has yet. And that's okay. So let's just hold Shift and draw whatever shape hexagon we like. That I had to count, sorry. So again, I could grab my selection tool and move it down here. And I could shrink this down by holding Shift. But I still need to change how many sides this has. And you'll notice a familiar widget here. I can round the corners. That's nice. But I can also change the number of sides my polygon has with this little widget here, which is maybe difficult to see, but if you look, there's a white diamond here, not a white square, a little white diamond. And when you hover on it, you'll see a mouse with a plus or minus. This is add sides or subtract sides. So let's zoom out. Oops, not that far. And if I click and drag up, I am reducing the sides. If I click and drag down, I am increasing the sides. And it looks like we're limited to 11 sides with this tool. So I could click and drag up until I have 3, and then I can move it until it's the right size and location. The other way you can make shapes, be it polygon, rectangle, or anything like that, you can choose the shape tool, and you can just click once on your artboard, and it will say, hey, what size do you want? If you're not sure, you can change the size whenever, and it will also say, how many sides would you like? I would like 3 sides, and it just drops a triangle right there for me that I can grab and move around and resize just like any other shape. So it really is 6 or half a dozen. Everybody has a method that they prefer, but that's how you choose how many sides. Were we able to make a triangle? All right, we're getting wild. So we've seen a rounded rectangle and a triangle. Now let's visualize how we could make this robot's hat. And I really like, this is one of the Adobe learning files, but I really like how they show us the outline that this hat, it's an antenna, I don't know why I say hat, is made out of 2 rectangles, a triangle, and a circle. So let's see if we can make that. If I grab my rectangle tool, I can click. It is hat light. Thank you, Brian. I can click and draw a rectangle. I can click and draw another rectangle. I can grab my ellipse tool and click and drag, but also hold shift so that it's a perfect circle. And I can make a circle. I'm going to grab my selection tool, press V on the keyboard really quick to switch it over. And then I need to make a triangle. So I will grab my polygon. And again, however you want to do it, you can click and drag and then reshape it. And it remembers your last shape, but you can still add sides if you like, the same way. And grab my selection tool, move it over, and I can still change the size and shape of it. It's a little too tall, it's showing through. And you can see they combine to make our antenna hat. They are still all individual shapes that we can move and change. And we'll be talking about combining them pretty soon here as well. But I will show you one more thing. When I have my selection tool, V on the keyboard, I can click and drag to select multiple objects. And if you look at your properties panel, you'll see that you also have alignment tools. So here, probably the most useful one would be to align the horizontal center. So if I click on that, it puts them all perfectly lined up with their centers, which is very useful. The other ones, maybe not quite so much right now. I can align left, align right, align top, align bottom, align vertical centers, and so forth. So now it's a little bit broken. So I'm gonna Command or Control Z until my hat comes back. Okay. Before we go, well, yeah, let's talk about strokes a little bit now too. I think that's a good idea. Let's just talk about how strokes work. Let's look at this triangle here. So right now this triangle has a white fill and no stroke. So if I click the up arrow on the stroke, it will have however many points of a stroke that I give it. I can also say I want 0.5 and it will have a 0.5 size stroke. I want you to notice right now that the stroke, if we look at the outline of my triangle, it is centered. So it goes a little bit inside and a little bit outside. And it also has a sharp end cap. And these are things that we have control over. So we can also change the stroke color. If we click on the stroke here, you can say blue or yellow, or, well, let's not do gradients, but you could do gradients and patterns. And if you click on the word stroke, you'll get your stroke menu where you can change the cap. Does the cap end at your line, round out beyond it, or just flatten out beyond it? So if I click projecting, there's not a lot that's going to happen right now because I have a closed shape and it's centered. But let's look at the alignment of the stroke first. So if you look at your stroke, you can align to center, to the inside, or to the outside. And I think that changes the, no, that's only with other shapes. I apologize. And then you can change the corner by making it round or beveled, or miter is the word that we have, sharp, rounded, or beveled. The reason the cap isn't working is because that's for, I believe, a straight line, which we're not going to worry about. So I thought rounded, I'm basically making a yield sign right here, right? And you can even create a dashed outline or stroke by clicking that. And you can say how many points wide it is and how big the gap is. So if I were to make it 2 points, I get a much smaller gap. And then the final thought here is that you can also have no fill, and that will create a shape with an outline that will show the things behind it or in front. Yeah. And if we see here, it doesn't cover up my hat because I actually made these after I made the triangles. So they got put up above in my layers. You can go poke around in your layers, or you can also right click, arrange, and bring to front. And now it's in front. So keep in mind that how you stack things will change whether or not they block each other. Do we have any questions about strokes? All right, I hope we're feeling good. Because the next thing we're going to do, now that we've kind of talked about shapes in general, is we're going to talk about combining shapes and using shapes to cut out parts of other shapes. So we saw that we can just stack them and make a shape like a hat. But if we look at this robot, we can see that, for example, its body, oh, they're not doing cutouts yet. They just combine them. I apologize. If we see its body, they're just using the order to create it. So, but we could also use this same concept to create a shape with a hole in it. So let's go ahead and just see that really quick, and we'll continue with the shape builder in a moment. So this rectangle, let's draw one like that. I'm going to grab the rectangle tool, draw something just about like it. And in fact, let's be clever here. Let's draw a rectangle here, and then round the corners. We've done this before. And then if we look at this robot up here, it has another rectangle on top. So let's grab our rectangle tool again and draw a rectangle on top. And let's make the fill a different color so we can see them more clearly. I'm going to click on the fill over here, and I'm just going to choose this deep red. It's not the same, but we're not going to worry about that. If I want to make sure it's lined up in the middle, I'm going to grab my selection tool, click and drag to select both, and select align horizontal and align vertical. And I could build this entire robot by making shapes that block one another, but I could also make it have an empty stomach by using what's called the Pathfinder or Shape Builder, which we're going to jump into quite a bit more in a moment. But as a little preview, if I use this Shape Builder tool, that's the mouse with kind of looks like a Venn diagram next to it, I can use this to combine multiple shapes into one new shape. And combine also includes cutting out from one. So I have to have two shapes selected, and you'll see by default, it's got a plus sign. So if I were to click and drag here and into the other shape, it's going to smush these shapes into one shape. And that will just give me my rectangle with rounded edges, which isn't really what we wanted. But if we hold Option or Alt on the keyboard, and I click on the center shape, it will delete that. It will use it to cut the shape out from the larger rectangle. So now, if I grab my selection tool, I've created a new complex shape by using two simple shapes. And this one is made up of many more anchor points than the original. So if we wanted to make the robot's arm, you could see what they did was they used a circle with another circle on top of it. They're grouped together, I believe. Yep. And then they used a rectangle. And if we wanted to, we could combine this to be one shape that we can keep as its own unique, complicated shape. So if I hold Shift and click on these, I can grab the shape builder and I can click and drag to combine them. And it still has the red on top, but let's look at this a little more. Let's make it fill white. Oops. Okay, I was on the wrong tool, I apologize. Fill with white. But it still has these other shapes on top. So let's go play with our next file to talk about Shape Builder and Pathfinder a little bit more, because I kind of jumped the gun on that. So we're going to open up file 2, shapes, Adobe stock 193999, whatever. Okay, double click. So all of these shapes we can make pretty quickly. This is just an Adobe stock file we found that had the Illustrator file objects in there already. But let's say I wanted to make a heart. A lot of us might visualize a heart as, I don't know, 2 circles and a triangle. But there's an even easier way if you think about 2 rounded rectangles crossing each other. So let's check out making a heart. I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and I'm going to draw a skinny rectangle. And I'm going to rotate it. And here's a little tip: if you hold Shift while you rotate, it will do it to 45 degrees. And then what we're going to do, and this is, I believe Brian also loves doing this. I like to make copies while using the Move or Selection tool by holding Alt or Option. And if you see when you hold Alt or Option on your keyboard and hover on a shape, you get 2 cursors. That means it's going to clone or duplicate it. So you can click and drag while holding Alt or Option and make a copy of any shape you like, any object that's on your artboard. This is a very good habit to make as you design, because it's nice to have a backup. You don't want to ruin your original. So sometimes when I'm working on something, I'll just zoom out, hold Option, and put another version off to the side, just in case I need it later. So that's a good habit. So I want to make a copy of this rectangle. Actually, before I copy it, let's go ahead and round the corners out. So I'm going to round them out all the way. maybe you can start to see how we might make a heart out of this. And then I'm going to hold Option and click and drag it over. If I hold Shift, it will keep it aligned with my other one. So maybe I want to do that. I don't have to. And then I'm going to rotate it the other way. I'm going to hold Shift and come back here. And if you kind of look, you can see, hopefully you can see a heart shape right here where these two shapes overlap one another. Were we able to make two rounded rectangles? Oh, we got a heart. We're making hearts in Zoom. So if I select both of these, what we want to use our shape builder to do is to keep this shape here and delete these two outer ones. So I'm going to grab my shape builder, and notice I have to have both the shapes selected. So I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to grab my shape builder, and where you click and drag is what you're going to turn into one final shape. You're kind of like fusing them together. So if I click and drag here to here to here, it's saying, this is the shape I'm going to make for you out of these overlapping shapes. Yes, absolutely. Let's duplicate again. It only takes a moment. So I'm going to grab my Move tool, and I'm going to hold Option or Alt and click and drag. You can always also copy and paste, right click. No, you can't right click. You can go Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste, and that'll give you a copy as well. So it's up to you how you like. And then on my Move tool, my selection tool, you're very welcome. I held Shift and rotated it outside. Okay, perfect. How did you make it 45 degrees? If you move your mouse to the corner while on the selection tool, you click and hold, you move it till you get the bent arrow, and then hold Shift before you click. Well, you don't have to do it before. And then you can keep it at 45-degree angles, which is nice because you really want to be precise when you're designing. Perfect. And then we can move them over. If you want to be precise, you can select both and you can align them by center, vertically, and horizontally. And then we know that our heart will be symmetrical. That was over here in the alignment panel in our properties. So again, if I moved it over, I can select both, and I can choose align horizontally and align vertically. And then we went to our shape builder tool. The keyboard shortcut is Shift and M if you like keyboard shortcuts. I know I do. And then we just clicked and dragged along where the actual heart shape is, and we let go. If you want to finish with the shape builder tool, you can also hold Option and click on the two extraneous bits. And we have a heart. If I had made my rectangles a little shorter, it would look a lot more like this one, but mine came out a little long. I guess the hearts are user's choice, right? Okay, so what else can we do with our shape builder? We can combine to make a heart. We could make a moon. Let's say we want to make like a, I don't know what to call it, not a half moon. Anyway, a crescent moon, that's the word. So we could draw a circle with the ellipse tool. I'm going to hold Shift. And then on our Move tool, we could hold Option and duplicate it. So we have two here. And I'm going to make this circle a different color so we can visualize what's going to happen. So I'm going to grab the fill. Interesting. And I'm just going to make it this green color here. So I just switched it over to the painter's palette because it's got a strange swatch loaded. We're not going to play with that today. Okay, how did I delete the rest of the part? I'm going to do it again right now with the circle. And that was by using the shape builder and holding Alt or Option and clicking on the parts I didn't want. But you have to make sure you have both selected. So let's look here. If I move this circle here, what I'm going to do is use this green circle to cut out from the purple circle. And how much of a moon I want will depend on, or I get, will depend on the amount of overlap. So this looks pretty good. So I'll select both by clicking and dragging to get them both. And then I'll grab my shape builder tool. And just like with the heart, instead of combining, just like with the end of the heart, I'm going to hold Alt on Windows, Option on a Mac, and I'm going to click on parts I want to cut out. So if I click here, I've ended up with this kind of dueling crescent moons, and then I'll also remove this one. So I just held Alt or Option. And now I have a little moon shape. So the same concept could apply if you were trying to make a bean. I like beans. So let's just say we take two circles, select them both, use the shape builder, and click and drag. And maybe a bean isn't the right name, but I've created this almost snowman. That's using the shape builder. And I do want to say that it's got to, like most things, it does take a moment to get used to it, but all of these tools are reviewed on our resource page. So if you got a little lost in the shape builder, that's okay. I can play with you guys with the shape builder even more, but that's just kind of an introduction how you can use the shape builder to combine and cut out multiple shapes to make complex shapes. Good, and Brian dropped the resource page in there again. Okay, before we go into the pen tool, I would like to show you the direct selection tool, which would be how we could make shapes like a trapezium or a trapezoid, a parallelogram, and maybe even a diamond. So let's make this trapezoid, or good. All right, so let's draw a square, which we have one here, but let's just go ahead and draw one. Why not? I'm going to click and hold and grab rectangle. I'll hold shift and draw a square. When we're on the selection tool, our anchor points are just used for resizing and changing the shape again, but we can't change the angle of a specific anchor point. And that's what these little white squares are that I'm discussing. Shapes are made out of these points. But if I switch to the direct selection tool, which the keyboard shortcut is A, I can take a specific point. Let's go ahead and click on it once and then click, and I can actually change my shape. So I always like to start with basic shapes. In my opinion, you can get quicker and cleaner results using the shape builder, but then eventually maybe you need to go in and get a little more specific with the direct selection tool. So if I want to make this into a trapezoid, I can click on this one anchor, and instead of using my mouse, because I want to move both of these in the same amount, I'm just going to use my arrow keys. And if you arrow to the left, it moves it 1 point at a time, which isn't great. But if you hold shift, so I'm going to undo here. If you hold shift and click or tap your left arrow, it's moving them 10 points at a time. So I could do this 5 times, maybe 7 times. And I'll know that I can do it 7 times on the opposite end. So I'll click on this corner, hold shift and arrow right, I think 7 times. And I made a trapezoid or trapezium if you prefer. You can also choose more than one anchor point. Let's say I just wanted to make it a little bit shorter. I could click on this one, hold shift, click on the other one, and arrow up, and it will move just those two anchor points, which is just a more precise way of changing the size than just using the direct or the regular selection tool. What do we think? Can we make a trapezoid okay, or trapezium? Nice. And let's say I wanted to turn this rectangle into a parallelogram. I could click on this bottom right-hand corner, hold shift and move it over 1, 2, 3. And then I could click on this one and move it over 1, 2, 3. And now it's a parallelogram. So you have more control. You have infinite control, really, but you want to work as smart and with as few points as possible, which is why we like to show the shape builder, duplicating shapes and cutting them out, because the less anchor points you need to make it, the smoother and better looking design you will end up with. And then I guess I didn't show, but maybe we want to cut. Well, no, that's okay. I don't think we need to go there. Do we have any questions about the direct selection tool with shapes? We are going to do something with the direction tool in a little bit again, but or any questions so far in general? Feeling good? And we're just working in small steps. So we are going to talk about the pen tool for just a moment, because I really, the best thing you can do to learn the pen tool, I think, is to find tracing templates in videos and practice making your Bezier curves and all that good stuff. But let's just talk about it for a moment. The pen tool is a vector drawing tool where you drop an anchor point and then you drop the next one and it makes a line from one point to the other. If you simply click, you're going to be drawing with straight angles. And if you go to your first point, like if you click here and go all the way, you'll create a closed shape. If you don't, you'll have created just a simple line. We put a pretty good video here and some guides about using it. I don't know why that's there, but that's okay. So let's look at the pen tool for a moment here. The keyboard shortcut is P, and that'll switch to your pen tool. And if I wanted to draw a triangle with my pen tool, let's just go up here. That's down here, that's fine. If I click once, you'll see that now we have an anchor point with a line coming out of it. So I have entered my object drawing mode. And if I click again, it will drop the next anchor point and allow me to change the direction of where my line goes. And these purple guides that I kind of haphazardly mentioned are really helpful for drawing consistent shapes and figuring out where your anchor points are. So if I'm drawing a rectangle, I could click here, and because my fill is on, it will fill the space within your lines, even though they're not a complete shape. But let's go ahead and make sure we go back to the very first one so that we can see the pen tool now has a circle instead of nothing. That means you're closing your path to make a shape. So if I click that, this is now its own shape. So if I click and just draw and then, well, so if you don't want to draw a closed shape, you have to hit enter on the keyboard to finalize what you drew. So let's look at these two. I'm going to switch to the move tool. This is a rectangle that is a closed shape. This is actually just two lines with a fill turned on. So if I go to the rectangle and I give it a stroke and I turn the fill to none, you'll see the shape is closed. And if I go to this 2 lines and I give it a stroke, you'll see it only strokes my line, which means it has an open end here. And if I give it no fill, you'll see it's just this line that I drew. With the pen tool, I do want to show you one little trick before we get into curves. If I wanted this triangle to kind of curve in or out, I can actually hold Option, and if you hover on a line, you'll get a mouse with a curve to it, and you can turn any line between 2 anchor points into a curve. So I'm kind of making a pizza slice here. You might notice I'm a little food motivated here. So this lets me manipulate a line after I've drawn it with the pen tool. And again, what I did was hold Option and click and drag on the line. So there are little tricks to create shapes with curves without doing actual what they call Bezier curves. So if I go over to this one and hold Option, I can curve this in as well. I think that's a pretty nice little trick, but the idea with the pen tool is when you click and draw, you're drawing straight lines. But if you click and drag, you've pulled out what we call handles. And these handles define the curve of what you drew and what you're going to draw after that. So if I pull this up, you'll see the curve goes up. And if I go to the left, it goes left. So if you follow the curve here. So I'm actually moving my mouse down and to the right, which is what my next curve is going to do. So these curves can feel a little difficult to manage because it controls not only the curve you just drew, but the curve you're about to draw. So if I draw a curve here, I can make a very sad circle. Basically, a circle is made out of, an ellipse is made out of 2 points with big handles. And again, I don't want to get wild with the pen tool because I mean, I'll be honest, I almost never use it. I use it to fix things, and design isn't my strongest background here. But it is nice to get an idea of what happens. But the biggest thing is to know that after you draw something, you're not stuck with what you drew. You can grab the direct selection tool and change your curves after the fact. So that's a tiny introduction to the pen tool. Teeny tiny itty bitty. Because we're going to show you some other cool stuff that will be more fun to use, and you can hit the ground running with. Okay, any questions about the pen tool though? I am happy to answer them. And you can always save them for later as well. Okay, let's talk about text, I believe. Yeah, let's do it. So let's go to 3, reshape text. And you will see a document that has some type on there for us already and what we're going to try to do. Before we do anything here, I just want to talk about type in general in Illustrator. So the type tool is right here. It's the T. So if you press T on the keyboard, you can click and drag to make I forgot the word. It's a paragraph type where your type will be confined in a box. Or you can just click once to make what's called a point type, which will just type on a line from where you clicked. Generally speaking, most of what you're doing when you're designing in Illustrator is using point type, unless you're making like a pamphlet with paragraphs of text. So for now, for your practicing purpose, just grab the type tool, click once, and you'll get this lorem ipsum, which is our Latin filler text, but you can type and it'll go ahead and cover it. When you're typing, you have to commit your text for it to be done. So you can do that by hitting escape on the keyboard or switching to another tool. You'll notice your tool keyboard shortcuts don't work when you're typing because you're typing. So if I press V, it doesn't switch to the selection tool. And yeah, I found when I work with a lot of text in Illustrator, I often put V's in there by accident because I'm so used to switching to the tool. So to commit the text, I'll just hit escape, and that automatically switches over to my selection tool that lets me resize my type. Just like the shapes, you have to hold shift if you don't want to mess the proportions up, which I highly recommend. Type can get a little ugly if we stretch or squash it. Whoops, there we go. So I'll make it a little bigger, and I can move it around just like any shape. I can rotate it. If I hold Option, I can duplicate it because, again, it's just another vector object in Illustrator. So just like any other object, when I click on it, I have my fill color. Make it this kind of yellow. And I also have stroke, which I can just do black. And if I click on the word stroke, I can move the stroke to the inside. Oh no, it doesn't work yet because I have to do something, sorry. So with type, your stroke options are limited until you turn it into an outline of itself. Okay, and then down here in the properties, you also have your fonts. That's a weird one, that's interesting. So Adobe has a ton of fonts, but what's also fun is you can find more by searching on fonts.adobe.com, and then it will instantly add them to your font library. Okay, that's just a tiny bit about using type. You can change a lot about it over here, the justification, the alignment, and kerning, the baseline and all that. So sorry. Let's go here and let's talk about taking type and turning it into kind of a visual design here. And the visual design, it was done by changing colors, changing the order, and stretching the shapes out. So let's go ahead and do that. It looks like we move the U down, we stretch the M out, and we make the O tall. We can't really do that yet because this is still text. So what you want to do is turn it into actual shapes. And you do that by right-clicking and telling it to create outlines. So right-click on numer, excuse me, and tell it to create an outline. And you'll notice my properties panel no longer has font options or anything like that. And let's click on Uno, and let's right-click, create outlines. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is move this U down and the N over. So right now they're all grouped together. Yeah, let's ungroup them. So let's right-click, ungroup. And if I click off and back on, now the U is by itself. And I'm going to go ahead and move it down. And I'm going to use those smart guides, those little purple pink lines, to keep it aligned. And then I'm going to click on the N and move it over. How do we do? Were we able to create outlines, ungroup, and move? There were two new ideas there, the create outlines and ungrouping. Excellent. So now on the M, if we were on our selection tool and we were just to make it taller, you'll notice it's not actually that effect of it having tall feet. It just looks like it's in a wacky mirror and got stretched. So we're going to use that direct selection tool, which is A on the keyboard. And we're going to select the bottom 4 anchor points. So to do that, I'll just click and drag and get those 4. And then I'll just drag them straight down. You could also use your arrow keys. And then over to Uno, we're going to grab these 6 anchor points. So I'm going to click and drag. And then I'll just, oops, you have to click on the anchor point and make sure it stays straight. What's nice is those smart guides help you draw, keep things at 0 or 90 degrees, because it could very quickly turn into, like it's, oops. Some people, if they turn them off, they'll, why is this fighting me? I apologize. They'll kind of not realize that it's off by like a point or a pixel. So those smart guides are super helpful. If you ever turn them off by mistake, it's under view and smart guides. Or sometimes the smart guides actually are making life difficult because it's snapping it somewhere that you don't want it to. You can turn them off momentarily by going view smart guides. So this is a nice little design trick for creating a little like font logo. So you can take something simple, and I think this is crooked, but that's okay. There we go. And just make it slightly more engaging without a ton of effort. Can I stretch the M again? Yeah, let's do it. So I have to make sure I'm on my direct selection tool, which is A on the keyboard. I'll click on the M and I'll see that what I want to drag are just the feet, which are made up of 4 anchor points. And if I just drag one, oops, if I click on one, it comes down and it creates this, right? I could do them one at a time, but what I can do is either hold Shift and click on each one, or just click and drag to make a box that gets just the feet. And then it might be easier to use your arrow keys. I'm just pushing arrow down, or you can grab an anchor point and pull it down with your mouse. But I think I broke my smart guides because I arrowed down the first time. And we'll stretch the O the same way. Click and drag to draw a box around them and pull it up. I think did I turn my smart guides off? I did. That's funny. Oops. Okay, we've got one last thing to show you, and then we'll have time for questions. Are there any questions about manipulating type, turning it into outlines, and using the direct selection tool to play with it? Okay, and this last piece might be one that you play with the most. It's a fun way to get a starting point. So if we look at 4 image trace images, there's 3 files in there. Let's just use the first one, the strawberry. And let's right click, open with, and I believe this is the same in Windows, and tell it to open with Illustrator. And then after this, we'll talk about saving. And I wonder, well, that's okay. So I'm going to show you something called image trace, which has gotten, I think, even more powerful over the years with Adobe's research and innovation. But you can take a photograph, a raster-based image, and turn it into a vector. You can also do this with simple line drawings. Maybe you have a picture of your logo, but you no longer have the vector. You could scan it in and turn it back into a vector using this feature. It's not perfect. It's not magic. You might have to go do some fixing after the point, but it might save you a little time as well. So if we grab this strawberry and we click on it with the selection tool, we'll see on the right-hand side, we have some quick actions. We have, well, the only one we're worried about today is image trace, but you can also do what's called, you can crop it. If you've got more than what you want, you can remove bits of it and apply. And you can also change whether it's embedded or linked, which describes whether or not Illustrator is pointing to it on your computer, or if it's actually pixels on your design. And you can change the order. But let's look at image trace. When you click image trace, it's going to give you an option. Do you want to make a black and white logo, 6-color design, a high fidelity photo, low fidelity? So let's go ahead and choose low fidelity. And it'll give you a warning, hey, this is a big image and image trace requires computational power, so things might get slow for a bit. So we could take a moment to rasterize it to turn it into actual pixels on the screen. But we're just going to click OK because I don't think it's too crazy. So now it's doing some magic. And if you look at it, it still kind of looks like a photograph. I did low fidelity, so it did less colors. But if we zoom in, we can see that it's kind of turned it into a vector. But I'm still previewing my image trace. So if you look in my properties, I still have other options. So I could choose 3-color, and you'll see it'll be a much more simplified version. It might not be what I want, but it turns it into this. You know, this, maybe I'm trying to turn something into a t-shirt and I was told it can only be so many colors. Or I can try high fidelity photograph, which I think is the most impressive one. And this is often a technique used for enlargements, for billboards and things like that. So things that are huge and viewed from far away. If I zoom out, it still really looks like a photograph, but if I zoom in, I can start to see the separated colors. So let's say I like high fidelity photograph. The next thing I have to do is tell image trace to expand. So I'll click that. And what it does is actually take the image trace and turn it into a bunch of vector objects. So if you see here, it's a ton of them. If I click off of it, it still really looks quite photographic. And if I zoom in, I could grab my direct selection tool and I can grab specific pieces if I want. Like there's that little center. I could also, when I'm on my selection tool, I could ungroup it if I wanted to, which would turn it into a bunch of separate objects. So for example, the white is its own thing now. And I can just take little bits. I don't really know how often you want to ungroup, especially if you've done high fidelity. But let's see. I guess I could have shown you before I did it. You can also go and change your options. So I'm just going to undo here. Okay. So while I'm in image trace, so here's the black and white logo, but I can also click where the presets are. I can click Open Image Trace Panel, which will give me even more settings. So for example, this black and white mode, I can change the threshold and it will recalculate and find different parts of it. If I go to advanced, I can tell it to ignore white and it will remove that white background from it. It's on a artboard right now, so it's kind of on top of there as well. and I can choose, 6 color. But then when I'm in this color panel, I can say, you know what, I wonder what 7 colors would look like. And I can hit 7 colors just by choosing this slider here as well. So you can go and finesse your image trace to get even better results. It takes a little time because it retraces each time, but it is a super handy tool. We've got 15 minutes, so I'd like to show you how to save and then have time for any questions that you might have, if that's okay. Okay, so let's say we wanted to save this numero uno design. What you want to do is have the artboard be the same size as your design. So my favorite way to do that is to actually take my design off of, oops, how did I miss the R? Off of the artboard and use what's called the artboard tool to make a nice little artboard the same size as it. So this is us saving a finished project. I think I did it a little out of order, but that's okay. So down here above the magnifying glass is the artboard tool. If you click on that, you'll see we have one artboard that we can resize if we want with this tool. But if you click on your selected design with the artboard tool, oh, I thought it would do it all at once. Fine, let's just draw an artboard behind it. I'm just going to click and drag. Now this has an artboard as well, and I have 2 separate ones, but I can export based on artboards. So I grabbed the artboard tool and just drew a board behind it. And then I can go File, Export, and I can export for the screen. And this is going to give me this dialog where it says, hey, which one do you want to save? Do you want to save both or one of them? I just want artboard 2, so that's already only checked. And you can choose what's going to happen with the background by going to your advanced settings here. Is the background transparent, or is it going to be a different color? You can also choose your formats here. And you can choose where it's going to go. So I'm going to save into the same folder, which it already is. And you can rescale if you want it to get bigger or smaller. So right now it's going to save it as the same size. I can say, hey, save it 4 times bigger, or I can put a specific size in as well. But let's go ahead and do just 4 times. And let's export artboard. And you'll see it opened up my Finder to show me numero uno exported as a PNG file, which has a transparent background. The final thing about saving, which should have been the very first thing I said, was that you should save your files regularly by going to File and Save. If you have opened an existing one and you go and File and Save, it will override it to its current state. But if you want to name it something different, you can go File, Save As, and I can call this Reshape Text Practice. And it's going to save an Adobe Illustrator file that has all of my vector objects still and can still be changed after I close it. So there's 2 different ideas for saving. Are you saving a flattened image to share out and print, or are you saving your in-progress design that you want to continue to work on? Any questions about saving / exporting? Those 2 words mean the same, really. Export just means you're saving it as a different format and smushing it together. All right, so that was a whirlwind tour of Illustrator. This will be recorded if you want to revisit everything, and it's also it's going to be paired with that resource page that reviews everything I talked about today and has links to take it further. So thank you so much for being here. Hopefully this was helpful.